recording this meeting.
All right, welcome in everyone. This is a Great Lakes ROTA-RC presentation, and today's webinar is grant writing tips. Today's webinar is being hosted by Great Lakes ROTA-RC's regional partner, UW-Madison Division of Extension. I'll be your host. My name is Amanda Cura. I am the project's regional project manager. Before we get stuck into our presentation today, we have just a few quick housekeeping items to address. We're going to go forward and talk about our funding acknowledgement and our funding activity. The Great Lakes ROTA-RC is funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. And we provide training and technical assistance to the rural communities within the Great Lakes area. Collaboratively, we develop and strengthen community capacity to prevent, treat, and support recovery for opioid use disorder and mental health conditions and substance use disorders. Through cooperative extension state programs, we employ evidence-based and emerging practices to provide virtual and/or on-demand education for rural community members regarding substance use education and other relevant topics in mental health and substance use disorders. We do this in communities as well with Indigenous populations. The project co-creates with culturally responsive and holistic health education and resources. We also provide evidence-based resources and research, as well as technical outreach to professionals working in and with rural communities. We invite you today to learn more about the Great Lakes Rural Opioid Technical Assistance Regional Center, its resources and partners by participating in our grant projects. You see there, products. You see there our website is up on the screen. We'll be providing all of our details and information towards the end of today's presentation. So don't worry, you'll have an opportunity to get those links later on. I want to take a moment just to move forward and demonstrate what some of our products look like. This is our website. It's new, it's snazzy, so make sure you check it out. There's opportunities to get access to our virtual education, our newsletter articles, to learn more about technical assistance, to get access to our community tools and resources, to get updates on the latest in mental health and substance use news, and updates about our regional partners, as well as to learn about funding announcements. So feel free to check it out. Also want you to learn more about our newsletter. We have monthly updates regarding our newsletter, so feel free to go and check that out. We provide regional highlights, Ask the Expert articles, Great Lakes neighborhood articles, which features local coalitions, projects that are happening, as well as connections to SAMHSA, the TTCs, and more. So make sure that you get signed up for that. And again, we will be providing links to those things towards the end of today's presentation. Right, so before we prepare to listen and engage in the session content, let's just take a moment to promote the use of affirming person-first language when discussing behavioral health disorders. As we create an environment of learning together, let's create that learning space that is welcoming and safe for everyone. As a virtual learning community, we ask that all participants support that non-stigmatizing, recovery-oriented language that can help us reduce negative bias and promote engagement. As always, we invite your active participation from whatever space you're joining us from today, and we welcome you formally into the Great Lakes ROTA-RC virtual learning community. I want to move now into welcoming our presenters for today's topic. Patrick Nehring has been providing extension education and research in Wisconsin counties in the areas of community, natural resource, and economic development since 2000. Prior to extension, he was employed as a Main Street program manager and worked in city planning development. Ariga Grigoryan has been providing community, natural resources, and economic development education in Sawyer County and with ROTA-R tribe. Ariga focuses on various community needs, including food sovereignty, leadership, and organizational development, with the integration of the ROTA-R tribe tribal cultural elements in her work. Excuse me. And Kayla Rombalski is the community development educator in Wood County. Her work is focused on advancing Wood County's economic development strategy. She facilitates community development solutions around impact areas such as housing, entrepreneurship, broadband, and childcare. Kayla considered herself a servant leader and is skilled in collaboration, relationship building, and program facilitation. I'd like to hand it over now to our panel of presenters.
Patrick, you're muted.
Yeah, I saw that. So I'm joined by my colleagues, Ariga and Kayla. Ariga's in Sawyer County and Lakota tribe, and Kayla's in Wood County. I'm in Broward and Kewaunee. And on the map here, you'll see that we cover different parts of the state. I'm in the east. So Broward and Kewaunee are the two that are towards the on the east side of that. And then our colleague Mia Young is also giving this presentation. We've provided this training a couple of times a year, and this time we're providing it for you. So we'd like to see where you're coming from, and from that we're going to show a poll, which I can't do while I'm showing my screen. Oh, here it is. So then we wanted to find out from you what your experience is prior to this for grant proposal. So, and we'd also like to know about you. So if you could include in the chat your name and pronouns and county or tribe or state that you're coming from, and what brought you here today. Give you a few minutes to fill out that poll, and also put your information in the chat. It helps us to kind of know where you're coming from. So as you can see on your screen, that we brought up the poll that most of you have maybe written 3 or less grant proposals, and 35% of you have no experience with grant proposals. And that's this you will find is a overview of the grant writing process and what it takes to apply for a grant. We're going to look at the research of the grant and finding out about grants, and then we're going to look at the proposals on how to write those proposals and applications for a grant. So just some housekeeping things. If you can keep your camera on if you're comfortable, it makes it more of a conversation for us, and like you're in the room. Mute yourself when you're not speaking. And then we're sharing the airspace with others, so that's part of why we're muting that information too. Share that time for others to provide their comments. We'll take a 5-minute break in the middle of the workshop, and the slides and resources will be available after the workshop. We'll provide a Google folder link to you for those who are attending. So this is an overview of grants. We'll be doing a step-by-step process for grant applications and proposals. So the grant is the funds, and the proposal or the application is how you apply for that grant. We're going to tell you how to write those proposals and applications. And we have a number of activities that we'll be looking at throughout this process, and a question and answer time period. And then and we'll provide you with those resources after the workshop. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ariga.
Thank you, Patrick. So what is a grant? A grant is an award that usually is supported financially, and it's given to an entity by founding company, it can be foundation or the government. The grant can be given to an individual or a company to facilitate the goal or incentivize their performance. They're essentially gifts that do not need to be returned back, pretty much under most conditions. And important to not mix grants with loans, because loans you will have to pay back, and grant is just given without any funding that needs to be paid back. We will cover some of the reimbursement portions. Pretty much grants are not to be treated like loans. Next slide, please. So the grants are what they're targeted for. They can cover nonprofit work, support nonprofits. They can be given to state or local governments, such as county, the state if it's federal, and then townships, small governments, and then businesses. Businesses are not usually the ones that receive grants, but there are funds that are given depending on the funding that is available on federal level. Could be targeted some agricultural businesses. So this needs to always reflect back to what their requirements are. And usually in the beginning of the grant, they do mention what organizations can be the applicants to receive the funds. So today we kind of will focus on nonprofit sector of how nonprofits get the funding, and then what are the expectations with that. Next slide, please. So the common funded activities are operations, research, and education. Operation not to be confused with an office operation, such as electricity, staff, phone bills. And so you would, under operation, it means programs. If there is a program that would target, let's say, opioid crisis, and then in terms of that, it's a program, and then certain percentage can be covered for the office expenses and staff that you will need to hire. Research, what kind of, if it's a research, can be, let's say, a new variety of beer or new variety of corn that needs to be researched. So those can be agricultural grants, or depending on if it's medical research, depending on the field. So research is also one of the fields that is definitely grant funded, could be grant funded. And education, if you're trying to build a capacity, let's say if it's an opioid field, then how are we promoting education on, let's say, increase awareness on opioid crisis or usage or percentage, and at the same time, how we are going to create programs that create education as well as decrease the opioid numbers or percentages in communities. Next slide, please. Okay. So for nonprofits, usually it looks like nonprofits heavily depend on grant funds, but to kind of look at the chart, that it's not necessarily the case. So only 19% here in this chart, and this is annual report usually prepared by the Giving USA. This is 2022 numbers. 19% only is funded by grants, the program. 67% is funded by individual donors. So, and then you can see 4% only by corporations and 10% by bequests. So 67% could be individuals that would support, local donors that support the cause, or sometimes it's family and friends. So depending on what your financial strategy is for your nonprofit, grant funding usually shouldn't be the only source of funds that you should get for your nonprofit. You have to consider diversifying your nonprofit financial sources or strategy and have a plan. And most of the time, if you have a program, you could say, okay, this program can be funded by a grant fund. Another thing, usually you spend the funds of the grant funding and then you get reimbursed. So you would have to have some cushion to be able to spend the funds and then get the reimbursement from, most of the time it's with the federal government, you get reimbursed. Private sector functions a bit different. Private funds are a bit different. State also is different. Depending on who you apply to receive the funding, you need to know if you have any cushion money to spend first. I think that was it pretty much for this slide. Okay, I'll pass it on to Patrick.
Actually, it's me. Thanks, Ariga. So we are going to talk in detail about this whole process of grant writing, from where you find the grant all the way through writing a successful application. I will say, as Patrick and Ariga had both alluded to, this is an introductory presentation. So we're not expecting that you're going to walk away from this with the knowledge to become a professional grant writer, but the good news is that you don't need to be a professional grant writer to be successful in writing grants. So let's start by talking about where you find those grants. We are going to provide you with a list of materials that you will be able to review after this workshop, the slides from our workshop as well. And in that drive, there is a resource list for finding grants. So an easy way to find grants is to use the internet, right? To use Google, that's your friend. So you can certainly look on the internet through local governments and foundations, community foundations that might be near to where your operation is, whether that's a city-based community foundation or regional-based community foundation. They're out there. So take a look at those first. Grants.gov is a good place to start. Candid.org, which if you've been in the nonprofit space for a while, you may be familiar with that as GuideStar. Candid.org is the new name for GuideStar. So that's a good place to find grant information. 990 forms, and Patrick will go into more detail about that a little later in the workshop. And then even some local extension offices compile lists of grants. So there are a lot of different ways to locate a grant for what you might need. Next slide, please. All right, so just as we start off here, a few things to know. With a strong grants team and a clear direction, you can write a winning grant proposal. So as I said, you don't need to be a professional grant writer to have a winning application or proposal under your belt. Know your project needs and goals. So this is kind of an important piece, right? Grant writing is about convincing. It's about trying to get someone to give you money to secure whatever project you're working on, to have the sustainability for that project or that center or whatever it is that. So you want to have really concise and clear needs and goals. Grant approvals take a long time. So this is an important piece that I think often is overlooked, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail as well. A lot of times people think, oh, I'm going to apply for a grant and that'll be my quick fix to get me the money that I need to advance my program. Not always the case. Usually grants have a long timeline associated with them, and they're a lot of work. So that's the next point. A lot of time and effort. They usually provide support for a short period, and renewal of funding may not be possible. So when you're looking at grants, it's important to keep an eye on those specifics in terms of what you're applying for. So some grants are for a 3-year period, and after those 3 years, they're going to expect that you have a sustainability plan in place, and that you're able to find the funding after those 3 years if you're not able to apply for renewed funding for that grant. Others, of course, do have renewed year-over-year funding. It just depends on the grant that you're looking at. And then certainly applying for the grant does not guarantee that you will receive funding. I think this is true in many aspects of life, right? Just because you apply doesn't mean you'll be selected. And certainly in a lot of cases, there is just not enough money to go around. So you could have a really winning proposal that you submit, and you may still not be selected because there's those funding decisions can be very difficult. And then grants may not be the answer. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward here. So Patrick, next slide, please. All right, so we are going to start off here quickly with an activity. This is something that you'll do on your own. I've kind of been keeping an eye on the chat, and I see that everyone is here for a variety of reasons, but many of you are looking to improve your grant writing skills or just coming into grant writing and you're new to it. Some of you, it looks like, are actually working on a grant now and looking to, build in those outcomes and help to write the grant. So we want you to think about what brought you here to this workshop today, whether it's a project, idea, program that you're currently working on, or one that you are really just on the cusp of seeking funds for. There's got to be something that has brought you to this workshop. So on your own, in a notebook or a Word doc on your computer, go ahead and briefly describe the proposed program, how it relates to your organization's mission, and who will benefit from that program. And then what capacity do you have to carry out the program that you're looking to do? So what I mean by capacity is, do you have the staff, or do you need to write into the grant for staff time to manage this project? Do you have the time? We know that time is so limited among many industries and many different workers. So do you have the time and the staff to be able to pull off what you're applying for? Who will benefit from it? So obviously, if it's an opioid related grant, who are the people you're serving and how will they benefit? So take about 5 minutes to do this. I see it's about 11:22. Let's come back together at, say, 11:27. And we will ask for a couple of folks to share out with the full group if you feel comfortable. And we'll do that either by sharing out, and certainly turn your camera on and unmute yourself and share out that way, or share out in the chat. So I'll stop talking. We'll give it about 5 minutes, come back together at 11:27. Muting yourself and turning on camera or not, or if you wanted to post in the chat what you're working on. Sometimes the benefit of these workshops comes not only from listening to the presenters, but also from having an opportunity to listen to each other. And Patrick, if you could share slide again. We have someone who says that they did not get to the last 2 parts of the exercise. So while Patrick's doing that, I will say the last 2 parts were who will benefit, so who is being served essentially, and what capacity do you have to carry out the program. And I see that we've had a couple more people come on video, so I'm wondering if we have any volunteers. Audrey, can I pick on you? You're in my home county. I've got to pick on you, right?
Yeah, that's fine. I was gonna offer it anyway. So I don't know a lot about the grant we're applying for yet. I know we talked to you about this already, but so maybe you can fill in the gaps. But for the proposed program, it's the Parents as Teachers program. It's called PAT, P-A-T. It is developmental to help the parents and families. So it's for early childhood development program that offers research-based curricula that helps families raise children to be healthy, safe, and learning and ready for school. I just pulled that from the website. Our mission, which I think it means by our organization mission, is to maximize the quality of life across the lifespan. So this definitely fits in, as do a lot of things. And who will benefit from this program? The most vulnerable in our community will benefit. So women and marginalized populations. Half the families that we currently help are of Hispanic, Latin ethnicity. So we help marginalized populations such as minorities, immigrants, and socioeconomically disadvantaged families as a whole. We already have the paid staff available in the program in place. We just need the funds to basically continue this.
Great, thank you for sharing, Audrey. So in Audrey's case, this is a grant through the Wisconsin Partnership Program, which is actually administered through UW-Madison's Public Health Department. And this is a phase 2 grant for our Wood County Health Department. So this is one where I said earlier that sometimes you're not given renewed funding. This is one where they've been funded previously and they're looking to get that second level of funding. So there's a little bit more attached to that, that grant application for the second level. So it's an interesting example because it is that phase 2 level of funding. Other thoughts from those in the room who would like to share what you're working on? Okay, well, maybe we'll have a chance to share out. Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
All right, I can share. My name's Riley. I'm actually working on the grant right now with our executive director. I work for a nonprofit that centers mental health and substance use recovery. And we have a program within our organization that basically offers like a technical assistance forum to behavioral health agencies. And this grant specifically is actually offering technical assistance to peer recovery centers in Wisconsin. So yeah, we are kind of hoping to use a program model that we've already established, but just kind of expand our scope and reach to this particular like community in the peer support community, if that makes sense. Yeah, I am knee deep into a proposal right now, so just kind of cool to be able to hear what other people are working on and receive tips.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Riley. First, good luck. You're in the middle of the proposal, so I hope that it's a successful proposal and it's funded. And also, what a great example of something that you're currently working on, that you're already serving a population and now looking to expand those services and take it to another level. That's an excellent time to apply for a grant. And a great segue, because what we're going to be talking about next is when you should apply and maybe when you shouldn't apply, when grant funding maybe is not the right answer. So Patrick, if you could bring our slides back up. All right, we can go to the next slide. This is just a cover page for what's coming next. All right, so we are going to do another activity. So we've got 2 activities back to back. We hope to kind of break up some of the content sharing with allowing you guys to share out as well. So I'm going to post a link in the chat. Hopefully you're all able to access this. It is a Jamboard link, which is a Google link. So I know someone earlier in the chat has mentioned that you're not able to access Google Sites. So if you're not able to access this, you can certainly post your thoughts right in the chat and can share those out with our whole group. But you'll see on this Jamboard, there are 2 sides. One is what are some reasons to apply for a grant, and the other side is what are some reasons to not apply for a grant. So if you head over to the left-hand side of your screen, you should see a sticky note. Some of you have already seen this. You can click on that little sticky note or hit Control-Shift-P, and you'll be able to add a sticky note with your thoughts. So go ahead and type in whatever you're thinking in terms of what are some reasons to apply for a grant and what are some reasons to not apply for a grant. Thank you, Patrick just brought it up. So the sticky note feature I'm referring to is right underneath that arrow that you see on the left-hand side. So the arrow in the circle, right underneath that, there's a sticky note. So if you click on that, you can go ahead and add, change colors, I think you can bold things. So we're just going to take a couple of minutes to do this. I see that there are some that are generated already. So we can move them around, in your reasons not to apply, reasons to apply. And we'll just take a few minutes here and seeing some good examples pop up. And if anyone's having trouble utilizing this Jamboard tool, you can always just pop it right into the chat. So again, these are what are some reasons to apply for a grant, or what are some reasons not to apply for a grant. So some of the things that I'm seeing, and that you hopefully are seeing on the screen that Patrick is sharing, reasons to apply for a grant: to get funding to support existing services and continue offering them to the community, absolutely. To get a bigger population for the program, to expand to new audiences or underserved audiences, that's a great idea. To improve client services. Fits an existing mission, so it's already on scope with what you're currently working on, absolutely. Complement funding for initiatives not currently in the budget, so perfect. We're looking to expand, we're looking to do more, we don't have the money to do that right now. Let's apply for a grant. And then on the reasons not to apply side, the funding isn't always sustainable, right? So we just talked about that. So maybe it's for 3 years, and then you know that you're not going to receive funding after that, and you don't have a plan in place for how you're going to continue that funding out beyond that time frame. Time consuming with no guarantee, absolutely. Lack of capacity, you don't have someone to write the grant, maybe you don't have a team in place to do the writing, let alone to carry out the work. Too many constraints, lack of capacity, all of these are right on. Thank you for having such robust answers. This is great. You guys are really understanding it. All right, so this link should stay active, so you should be able to access this even after our grant writing workshop is done if you wanted to refer back to it. And then we do have in the chat a reason not to: grant terms are too restrictive. Exactly. All right, so Patrick, if you could go back to our slide deck. So here is essentially a summary of what the work that you guys just put into that Jamboard link, right? Deciding whether or not to seek grant funds. I always put things into a pro-con list. So if you are considering the positives and the negatives, reasons to apply: you're at the start of a new project, or you're starting to expand an existing one. We talked about this. Maybe you're looking to serve a new population or a new audience. You have the time and energy, so it's a good time for you, whether that's the time of year or the time in your work cycle or whatever that could be. It looks right. There's strong potential for community backing and support, so you've got a good support team in place, stakeholders engaged on board. We'll talk more about that in a bit. And then the timing is right. So as I said earlier, it's the right time. You have the energy, the capacity forward. Cons or reasons not to apply. Conversely, the timing is not right. So maybe it's you're busier than you've ever been before. You don't have the capacity to manage this additional project that you're bringing on. You don't have the staff. Timing is just not right. The project does not match the grant guidelines. So this is something that we'll stress as we talk about actually writing the grant. But it's important to make sure that your project, just like your resume when you're applying to a job, that your project matches what that grantor or that funder is looking for. It'll save you a lot of time and energy if you don't try to fit a square peg into a round hole, knowing that if you have a good fit for the grant's guidelines, most likely you'll have an easier time getting funding. Other or better suited solutions exist. So this would be an example of, if you recall the slide that Ariga mentioned earlier about the sources of funding for projects, is there a private funder who could provide you funds for this project or program easier than a grant could? So for example, or maybe it's a crowdsourced operation. Maybe it's something where you think you could get 10 people to donate $100 and you would have the funding that you need for your program if it was a small scale operation. And then the money can become a drawback. So grants have a lot of red tape associated with them. There's a need to report back to your funder and to keep them informed of what the outcome of your grant operations have been. And so sometimes all of that extra reporting and all of that extra paperwork can become a drawback. It can be to the point where you're like, yeah, this is just not worth it for the amount of effort that I have to put in. Obviously, if it's a larger grant, if it's a larger funding amount, that may not be the case. It may absolutely be worth it. But those are things that you need to weigh as you're thinking about whether to apply for the grant. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, and he's going to talk about researching the next step.
So we had you think about a project or an idea that you might look at for that a grant could help fund. And at this point, we're going to talk about researching a grant. So we mentioned before that there's grant research libraries. The internet is a possibility for searching and finding grants. And then we mentioned 990 forms. And we'll explain what 990 forms are a little bit more here. When you're researching a grant, you want to look into what do they give to? What are they interested in? How much do they usually give out? And where do they give? This is important information because you don't want to spend a lot of time applying for or putting a proposal together for a grant if you have no chance of applying for it or receiving it. And so you want to spend your time working on something that you have a better chance of receiving. The internet is pretty self-explanatory, that you can search the internet and keywords and so on. Grant research libraries have librarians available to them for you to take and help you with your research there. And the 990 forms are a little bit different. So we're taking a closer look at the 990 forms here when we are going to be talking about this. So in the chat, I'm going to put a link that we have here to 990 resources. The 990 form is essentially the tax form that a nonprofit organization has to fill out. That includes foundations. And so you may be involved with completing a 990 form for your nonprofit organization, or it might be someone else within your organization. But all nonprofit organizations have to fill out a 990 form. There's a short form, 990N, which they call a postcard. And then there's a 990 Easy and a 990 PF, which is for private foundations. These can be found at the IRS website. And the link here on the screen is looking at where those annual filings take place. And we had mentioned GuideStar and Candace, and the 990 forms are public information. So they're available from the IRS website and from some other sources like Candace and which is GuideStar. And they, in some cases, have compiled that 990 information in a database or a particular format. Some of the foundation libraries have that database assembled that way too. And you can find the information that they provide from the 990 forms themselves. And we'll explain what we're doing when we're searching for that. For those databases, a lot of times they'll charge for it, but you can do some of that research on your own. So what's in a 990 form? If you take a look at the forms you have here, this is what those pages look like. We're looking at the foundation name, the address, assets, total, grants paid, officers, grant recipients and amount, and grants pledged for next year. So we're going to do some detective work here, and I'm going to share stop sharing this particular screen and share another one with you. As we look at the IRS website, you'll notice up in the right-hand corner, there's charities and nonprofit. Are you seeing a website? Or are you seeing the?
We see the website, Patrick.
Okay, my screen's different. So there's up in the right-hand corner, there's charities and nonprofits. If you go there, you'll find that there's a link to tax exempt search window. And then if you go to that, you can go to their search tool and you can search for exempt organizations. You can search by EAN number, but you probably don't know what that is. That's the Social Security number, more or less, for an organization. That's the business identification number. And then in this case, we're going to search by name. You can search by a word like foundation, and it'll bring up a large list. You can also search by city and by your state, narrowing that down. In this case, we're actually going to look for the Jeffries Foundation, which doesn't necessarily apply to many of you, but it's one that it's a nice example because of the information that is gathered by the Jeffries family. So I've already pulled up the 990 forms for the Jeffries Foundation here. And the Jeffries Family Foundation is an organization in Wisconsin. So we'll look at their particular 990 form. And I've already pulled up one of those. We'll start at this page. So if you can put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself, what do you see on this first page that would be of particular interest to us? If we're looking for who do they give to, what are they interested in, what do they usually give out, where do they give? But there's also some basic information that we can find on this page that would be helpful. So you'll see that we have here the PO box. So we know their address. We know that they're located in Janesville and their telephone number. So likely they'll be interested in something near where they're located. And so we know that they're from Wisconsin and in the Janesville area. If we look further down the page, we can see that they have, in the last year, their total revenue was 2,800,000, and their distributions were around 1 million. So we know and have an idea of what they give out. For the interest of time, I've skipped ahead a little bit within the form. What would you see, and you see on your screen now some additional information? What would be important for us to know that we can find on this page? And you can either unmute or put it in the chat. Well, again, we have the phone number for the organization for where the books are kept. So it's not the phone number for the organization, it's a phone number for their accountant. But what's more important is we have the address, their website address for the Jeffries Foundation. Further down on the form, we will find this information. And what would be particularly interesting for us if we're looking for applying for this particular grant. And you can put the response in the chat or in the mute or unmute yourself. Well, we would see that we have a list of the officers and directors for the organization. And if we knew Roman Vetter, we could probably give him a call and say, hey, Roman, we're looking to apply for this particular grant. And we know each other. What do you think of this project that we're looking at doing? And do you think that it would be a good fit? And how would I go about applying for the grant? So the Jeffries Family Foundation, as you can hear in the name, they're a family foundation. So they are a larger organization, but a lot of times you'll find that the private foundations are made up of a small group of people. And if you know somebody on the board, there's nothing wrong with asking them how you can apply for that particular grant. And they may be able to provide you for some advice on that. Then it might also give you some benefit in that they know as they're sitting around the table looking at different grants, if there's a familiar project or some familiar source that they're looking at, you might move further ahead on that list of recipients than others might. And this is another important part of what's on the 990 form. You'll see the grants and contributions paid during the year, the previous or this particular year of their tax form. What do you notice about the recipients of these particular grants? Who do they give to? Yeah, so as was put in the chat, there's charities. So you'll notice if you look at the list, they're all public charities. So they're looking to provide funds to public charities. So if you're a business operation, this might not be the particular grant that you'd want to apply for. What does it look like they're interested in? Yep, the emphasis seems to be on restoration. So if you're looking at a project for your particular organization that has to do with an historic property or a historic site, and you need to make some repairs to it or some improvements, this might be a good foundation to apply for a grant for, or to submit a proposal. So they're interested in historic preservation. And if you are in restoration, then that would be a good fit. If it's not, then you might want to look for something else. And how much do they usually give out? What's the range that they provide contributions to? You'll notice that they've given out grants for $600, and in this case, up to $270,000. So it's a wide range, but if you're looking at a project that's only $500, this might not be the best place to apply for it, because they may be looking at projects that are of a larger size. So when we're talking about how much they usually give out, we're looking at a range of amounts that they contribute to. If you're below that range, your project may be too small for them to really look at and contribute to. If you're above the range, you might not receive the grant because you're asking for more than they're willing to provide. So you want to stay within that range of what they've normally fund for a grant. And if we look at where they give, where do we see that they give contributions? What's the geography or location of these projects? Yes, they're in the Midwest. So we notice that they give grants to those private or public charities that are in the Midwest. And so when you're looking at applying for a grant, if you see that most of their contributions they give are to somebody, are to charities in California, you know that this is not one that you want to apply for. If you see that it is in the geography that we're in, Wisconsin in our case, but if you're in a different state, it might be Ohio. And you'll notice that Ohio is in the Midwest, but if you're tuning in from Pennsylvania, this isn't going to be something that you're going to be looking to apply for a Jeffries Foundation Family Foundation grant, because they really only focus on the Midwest. And if we did a Google search on the Jeffries Foundation, we see that they're dedicated to the Midwest historic preservation. And it confirms what we learned through the 990 form. On their website, they also provide information on how to apply for those grants. So with that, we've looked at why you might consider applying for a grant, and if it's a good fit, because grants are provided by organizations and governments and states, and state and federal government, for projects that they would like to see done with, and they want to contribute some financially to that, making that happen. So what those government bodies and foundations are doing is they're paying you to carry out their mission that they're trying to accomplish. And because they're paying you to do their mission that they're trying to accomplish, it's good to do some research on that and to what they're interested in, and how they would, and if your project will fit in fulfilling that mission that they have through that grant. Are there any questions on researching the grant and looking at the possibilities of applying for one? Not hearing anything. We're going to take a 5-minute break. So if you want to come back at 12:05. And we're going to take a look at the common grant application. We'll put a link in the chat for the common grant application. This form is something that is put together by the Wisconsin Philanthropic Associate Network. And they are a nonprofit organization with members that are public-private foundations that work together and share resources. And one of those is a template for a grant application form. And we're going to use that template as we discuss the different components and processes for applying for or putting together a proposal for a grant. So we'll put that in the chat if it hasn't already been done, because I don't look at the chat right now. And then we'll take a 5-minute break, come back at 12:05. Open the grant. And the common grant application, like we mentioned, is a template that's shared in the Wisconsin Philanthropic Network. And just to make sure you understand that the components of the common grant application are what you would find with a typical grant application. But the grant application itself, the template, is not what you will need to submit. You'll have to look at what the requirements are or find out what those requirements are for particular grant that you're looking to apply for. So the components are there, but just know that you won't be able to necessarily submit that particular template for everything. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kayla, who's going to start our step-by-step process.
Yes. All right. So we are at step 3. You have done some research. You've found perhaps a funder or a number of funders that might be a good fit. You think you're ready to apply, and you're looking for some clarification on that next step. So I have the next couple of slides. I think it's the next steps 3 through 7. And I want to stress that oftentimes, even though we've set this up as like a linear progression, right? You do step 3, then you're on to step 4, then you're on to step 5. That's not really how it works in the real world. Oftentimes you're doing all of these things at once as you're preparing for the grant. So just know that linear progression isn't often the case. Usually these things are happening simultaneously. But here we are. Are you ready? Are you ready to apply? So do you have a clear project scope? We talked about that earlier. What is it that you're looking to do, and who are you trying to serve? Can you say that easily? And we'll talk about that in a future slide as well. Do you have a prospective grants team? So who's supporting you in this work to write this grant? I know as I looked at the chat when we started, there were maybe 1 or 2 people that said that they were looking to support others in their office that are doing grant writing currently. So they wanted to help that person feel like they're not operating in a silo, and maybe they're not doing it all by themselves. That's a great idea. So we are going to walk you through how to assemble a grants team. That's a good way to tackle, especially for larger grants with higher funding amounts. That's a good way to tackle that project. Does your mission align with those of the grant giving bodies? So we just talked about this, right? The Jeffress Foundation, they support historical restoration. If you're looking for a project that is specific to the opioid crisis, likely you're not going to apply for the Jeffress Foundation. And we knew that when we set this up, but we wanted to give you an example that was outside of the work that you're doing. So you don't all go to one funder and say, hey, I saw this on a grant writing webinar, I'm going to apply for your fund. So yes, so does your project and mission align? Are your operations sustainable? Again, we talked about this time and staff capacity. Is your concept, project, and plan workable? Next one, please. And will you be able to meet all the grant requirements? So it's not only about what you're applying for, it's also about your ability to carry out the work that you're saying that you're going to do to the funder. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So building a funder relationship, and Patrick, you can just roll through all of them. I'm good with them all being screen. So this is probably one of the most important pieces of any grant adventure, right? Once you have applied to a funder, you want to build and maintain a relationship with that funder for years to come. And it's the same as any relationship building, right? You are going to learn about the funder, you're going to talk to them, to really share what needs you have and what you're looking for. So again, when Patrick said earlier, as we were looking at the 990s to see who is on their board, is there someone that is your mother-in-law's neighbor that serves on this board? Can you talk to them before you even apply to say, here's my project, here's what I'm doing. This is the elevator speech, if you will, why I should be funded. And get that relationship established before they ever see your application come through the door. Then they know when they do see that application, oh yeah, this is so-and-so's contact. They've been talking with this person. They're really excited about this project. Let's take a look at this. Anything you can do to really get yourself to a higher position on that pile, right? If they have 100 grant applications that they're looking through, you want to find any way that you can to distinguish yourself from those other 100 applicants. And most likely it's going to come from the relationship. So you want to tell your story and pitch it to the funder. So I talked about that earlier, that elevator speech piece of quickly and concisely being able to share who you are, what you're doing, and why they should fund you. And then creating a win-win relationship by matching the funder interest with yours. So Patrick alluded to this earlier. Funders are not giving out money I'm going to backtrack a little bit. They are giving out money for charitable intent and for the common good, but they're also trying to achieve their own mission, right? So if their mission is to combat the opioid epidemic, they most likely have a set of, excuse me, not opioid epidemic, I misspoke there, opioid crisis. If that's their mission, they most likely have a set of outcomes related to that mission, right? They want to see reduction in overdoses by X number of instances. And forgive me, you guys know this subject matter far better than we do. We're just providing these examples. So if my words are off, if I'm misspeaking, please forgive me. It's not my intent. But so being able to create that win-win relationship, helping them meet the outcomes that they have for their funding objectives, and then also helping you to move your project or your program forward. And then again, that funder interest, matching that funder interest. All right, so step 5 is creating a grants team. So when you're thinking about the people that you want to support you in grant writing efforts, who can you bring alongside you to help you have a stronger application and to help build that team of stakeholders who are advancing your work, right? So ensuring that your team members have varied expertise and perspectives. So perhaps, again, and I'm spitballing here. This is not my expertise, but if you're looking at it, an opioid grant, do you have healthcare providers? Do you have community nonprofits that are involved in this work? Do you have the people that you're serving directly all on your team aligned and ready to move forward? So you can ask community volunteers and other organizations to serve, and you can make sure that you're always grounded in the community needs. So your project is always in line with what you're trying to do and also what that funder is trying to achieve, and that all of your team members are on the same page. And Patrick, please go to the next one. Thank you. And so keep the team in place throughout the project grant to completion. So let me share an example from some of my grant writing experience. I recently worked on a grant for childcare access and affordability in the county that I serve. So we were looking at a couple of strategies to increase childcare access, increase the number of spots available for childcare, and also to recognize and retain childcare staff. So our team for that grant was we had a small team and then a larger team, right? We had a lot of stakeholders on board, and those stakeholders involved the health department, the school districts, childcare providers themselves, and business owners. We had representatives from the county. We had a wide variety of stakeholders, parents, healthcare providers, and they all came together to help us write a compelling grant narrative and to share the story of what they were seeing for childcare. So that's what you want to do when you're creating your grants. Next slide, please, Patrick. All right, so this slide is all about the money. So determining your funding needs. I think, and Patrick, you can advance through all of the bullet points there. I think the important thing to think about when you're thinking about your funding needs, what you're looking for, is making sure that you ask for how much you really need, right? A lot of times, especially as Midwesterners, we can be a little bit humble, a little bit shy, and maybe feeling like I don't want to request that much. If you've done your homework, if you've actually researched that funder, so I'm looking at the chat again with the Jeffers Foundation, that they serve, they've provided funds from $400 to $270,000. You know that your application and the number of dollars that you're requesting is on board with what that funder usually provides. So in that case, it's a very wide range. But if you're, right in the middle, maybe you're $100,000, ask for that amount. They funded something for $270,000. So clearly, if there's a need, if there's a compelling reason for you to receive those funds, they typically are going, they're going to fund it. They've done it in the past, so history would prove that they might. So it's important to make sure that you're asking for how much you actually need. To the point that we said earlier about the grantor, the funder, having outcomes of their own, your completion of whatever you're saying that you're committing to in this grant that you're applying for is going to reflect back on their own outcomes. So they want you to be successful. They want to make sure that at the end of this funding period that you can report back and say, look at all of this great work that we did. And if you are not honest up front about how much money you need to make that happen, you might be setting yourself up for failure or for difficulties in the future. So let's talk about some of the specific things related to funding when it comes to grant applications. Matching funds. This is something you'll see on a lot of grant applications, and you'll see that it says that those matching funds can be cash or in kind. If a funder is asking for a match, they want you to outline how you're going to match the dollars that they're putting in. So for example, we have an economic development grant here through the county that I serve. And on that economic development grant, we say we're looking for a 1-to-1 cash or in-kind match. So what we're looking for from the applications that come through is, can you support and essentially double our dollars with your own funds? And again, that could be to the example I gave earlier, crowdsource. So maybe you have a private donor or a number of private donors that are willing to invest their own funds toward this up to the amount that you're requesting. It can be that you have another funder lined up perhaps that will match the money that you get from this grant. They're just typically looking to really double their impact or to get back to that sustainability. So how are you going to make this happen? Not all grants ask for that match, but if you see that, just know that that's what to expect. And then you can also sometimes meet that match requirement with in-kind funds or in-kind contributions. And so what's meant by in-kind is, have you and your grants team been meeting about this topic? Have you done work in preparation for the program, or after you're funded, have you done work? You can contribute that back to the grant as in-kind funds, an in-kind match. Reimbursement or immediate payment. So this is a really important component as well to look for on the grant applications, because some grants do not provide the funding until successful completion of the project. So if you need that funding in order to complete the project, you're going to want to make sure that your grant is an immediate payment option. If you're looking at a reimbursement grant and you need the money to do the work, it's not going to be feasible if you don't have a way to get the funds prior to receiving the grant. So again, in the economic development example that I used, that is a disbursement of funds after the work has been completed. So the applicant comes to the granting board and says, here's what we did, here's the report of our outcomes, and then they receive funds at that time. They're not given funds before the work is done. And then typical grant range, we talked about that. Funded similar organizations, again, with that historical preservation example, if you're looking for funds in historical preservation, you know that you're kind of right on if you're fitting that way. Funders geography, we talked about that as well when Patrick was sharing the 990 form. And then other partners and long-term sustainability. So long-term sustainability is that piece that we mentioned with, if your grant is only for 3 years, where are you going to get the funds to continue this work at the end of 3 years? Or does the work simply cease at the end of that time? Sometimes that's okay, but you need to be you need to be upfront and transparent about the fact that that's your plan. That's what you're envisioning after the funding ends. Next slide, please, Patrick. All right, so we talked a little bit about this piece of telling your story, but I think when it comes to grant writing, this is the most important piece. You need to have a compelling reason for the funder to give you the funds, right? So how can you differentiate yourself? How can you share the good work that you're doing and really being able to tell that story? So some storytelling tips, and again, you can find a lot of different. Let me back up. We could do an entire 2-hour presentation just on storytelling and conveying your message and conveying your impact. We don't have enough time to do that today. So we're just sharing some tips and tricks here. You can find more on Google on various sources. But essentially what it comes down to is you want to be able to convey why that grantor should care about what you're doing. Why do they want to fund you? Establish how the project's long-term and short-term benefits tie right into the grantor's interest. So again, if you're looking at a grant from a foundation that has said that they want to reduce the opioid crisis, how are you going to do that? How is your work going to contribute to that mission? And then you see some other tips here, using facts and data to establish credibility, making the story personal, explaining the impacts on real people. In the nonprofit world, you sometimes hear this called like giving puppies and teddy bears to children. So really talking about how is it going to affect real people, and what is the story and the compelling argument that you have there. And then just some general writing tips. Avoid jargon, such as planning or engineering terminology. So again, you know your industry better than anyone else does, but you can't guarantee that the funders that are sitting on that foundation board or on that grant board are going to have that same understanding of the things that you deal with every day. So wanting to be as plain language and as concise as possible without using abbreviations or specific terminology is really important. I kind of skipped some of those first tips, so I will just say this is not a murder mystery. This is one that's important. You don't want to leave anything to chance with your funders. You don't want to have to leave them sitting around the table having to try to figure out, wait a second, what do we think that this person wants, or what do we think that this grant application is seeking? You really want it to be clear and concise and boldly listed in your grant application what you're trying to do. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ariga to talk about the types of grant applications.
Thank you, Kayla. So Kayla kind of covered a lot of the elements that go into proposals. So there are 3 types of proposals that you can prepare, and depending who you apply, which kind of funder you're going to apply the grant. So they usually have their request for proposals of what their expectations are in terms of your application. So there could be 3 types: a letter of intent, which is a 2-3 page summary. And here you only introduce your idea. And this is very common with private foundations. But you do not include anything in the budget. So if the funder is interested, they will contact you for further, let's say they will ask more details about the budget, etc. A letter of proposal, which is a 3 to 4 page description. This is also very common with private foundations, although I've seen some with federal too. So you introduce 3 to 4 page description, a project plan, and you include the funds here. You don't include a full-blown budget, but you do request how much funding you're requesting from these funders. Again, if it's a federal one, they will send you more information on to submitting a more detailed budget. And the long proposal is a full proposal that it's like a cover letter, includes a cover letter where you you mention your organizational parameters. Let's say you talk about your location, when this was established, etc. So, and then who is the director of the organization, or who will be the person managing the funds. And then proposal summary. So proposal summary itself is a narrative. In all 3 of these 3 types of grant applications, there are 8 elements that you need to cover. Kayla kind of covered a little bit of what can be potentially included in that. So in the smaller ones, the other 1 and 2, you can write it on a smaller scale, but those elements still need to be in place to make it a good proposal. Next slide, please. Thank you. So usually there are like 8 elements, and the part 1 is, let's say, grant and organizational details. Again, this is like the cover letter where you introduce. This is not part of the proposal, but this is just like the introduction of your organization. And in federal grants, you just include how much funding you're requesting. It's kind of looking on your location and what type of organization you are, business or nonprofit, and etc. So in part 2, the grant proposal narrative is usually where the whole essence of the project is. And again, this could be on small or large scale. The narratives usually are 15-page proposals. You know, sometimes it's 15. Again, you have to read their request for proposal. If there is a page limit for narrative, in federal, usually it could be 15. And this is where you put everything that you can. If you go over 15, then usually the reviewers are not required to evaluate that extra pages, and you kind of lose there. So in the 15-page narrative, you have different elements, which we will cover again for the next slides, and additional documentation. So you have your summary, or you have your cover letter with organizational, the narrative, which would be the 15-page, and then additional documentation, which could potentially include the support letters from your partnering organizations. If they request feasibility study or a marketing plan, sometimes people include maps. You know, you can include images, but you need to, again, refer to how much you can elaborate on additional documentation. Some grants say no additional documentation is needed, so you really have to follow what they're requesting. So if they say no additional, don't submit anything. If they say additional documentation is allowed, and then you kind of have to prioritize which documents you would like to send. Next slide, please. So in the narrative, which is the 15-page, or it could be 15 and a smaller scale on the other 2 types of applications, could be a sentence or 2 if they're small. Could be, I've seen an application of a page or 2. Again, you want to include all those elements, but maybe a sentence or 2. But you don't want to omit anything. Again, this is not a standard, but it's a good outline for you to keep the track of how you're writing, how you're putting your proposal together. Again, a grant summary, important. Usually this refers to written in the end. It's not part of the narrative. Usually it's like a separate paragraph, but there is a strict, sometimes with federal, they have a 200 words count, and usually the reviewers are required to measure how many words have been written, and sometimes it can be part of the scoring criteria, sometimes it's not, but it's very advisable to keep as many words as they're requesting for this grant summary. Very important. So again, for the narrative, you go down to background information on organizational background and project justification. So this is like an outline for you to keep, you know, who you are, what kind of organization you are, where you're at. Sometimes it's important to mention if it's not a founding organization that would know who you are, it's advisable to mention where you're located at, so that geographically puts you into rural or metropolitan. If it's a tribal community, then it's advisable to kind of write down those geographic locations. If it's a small community, remote, rural, you want to include that, because that sets the stage for the person who is going to review. Okay, these guys are a small community, and this is where they're located at. So it helps a little bit with geography there. And then you write why you're doing the work that you're doing as an organization. A lot of times this is omitted, but it's advisable to establish your credibility that you have experience in doing this type of work. You have been doing this for, you know, if you're a three-year-old organization and you have a history to work on these issues. So this is kind of getting into justification. Important to provide demographics of the area that you're working, because this could be your target audience. Very important to provide poverty levels, or if you're opioid organization, it's important to set the stage of what percentage of opioid and let's say drug abuse population you're working with, because then you could be a small organization showing that you have a big impact on the local population. Maybe you're targeting 65% of this audience in your program. So that kind of provides the ratio of your ability and then the impact of your programming. Very important points not to avoid, not to forget. So again, project description. You stated who you are as an organization, you talk about the audiences, and then now it's time for you how you're going to address these problems, okay? Very important to, in your narrative, establish the goals. A lot of times when people write, they forget about what they're trying to do, what the goal is of this entire application. The goal is the big impact that you're looking for, a long-term solution, reduce the substance abuse by, let's say, 20% by a certain time, okay, maybe in 2 years or 3 years. That's substance abuse-free community, let's say. That would be the big goal. And then you have SMART goals, which are more of a smaller steps on how you're going to achieve this big goal. Very important to consider if you're going to have a big goal, an umbrella, and how you're going to achieve this. Or if you have a few goals, then keep it to 1 to 3 main goals, because then if you have more, it's getting very confusing, and sometimes they say it's ambitious. You know, as a small whatever organization you are, you're not going to be able to complete these project activities within the given time. So keep it very realistic. And here is how you're going to how you're going to address this problem. Okay, you set the goal and then you provide your activities. A lot of times there are partnering organizations. You as the only organization might not be able to have a bigger impact. So it's important to mention that involves stakeholders. What other partnering organizations in the community do you have? If you are going to have them involved in your program, it's important you can just do bullet points. But sometimes there are proposals that say no bullet points. So you have to again read the guidelines, how they want you to prepare this proposal. So a lot of times, if there is no bullet point requirement, just state with bullet points, these are our stakeholders and this is what they will be doing. Providing that clear outline will help the reviewers not to go back and say, who were these guys? So the last thing you want to do is send the reviewer back into the proposal and try to make the connections for you. That's just going you will lose a lot of their attention. And the project plan, okay, you remember you have the big goals, or 1 or 2 or 3, depending on how many you come up with. This is how you're going to submit as a project plan. How you're going to address those big goals in sometimes it's a format, in a table format. So you create maybe SMART goals that you will make partnerships with these communities or establish a board. And then you provide the timeline, you provide what activities and who is going to do what by when. So this is a very technical part of the proposal, but it's very essential to provide those details. To provide realistic details, not to over a lot of wording and over convincing is not good as well. You just have to write technically what you're going to do, who is going to do that, when, and etc. And keep it as realistic as possible. Evaluation. Some private foundations do not require evaluation, and this is where you're off the hook. But some federal foundations require evaluation, and then when you come up with your goals, usually in the end, keep the goals in mind, and then think how you're going to evaluate this goal. Okay, how you're going to evaluate the success of your program. If the program was not successful, that's okay too. Maybe this methodology didn't go well or didn't reach the goal, didn't prove within the audience. That's okay too. You can, perhaps that's another idea for another proposal. Try a different way, okay? Try a different methodology. Very important to mention that if you had a previous funding with the same foundation, and if it's a similar project, what didn't work, and then what are you trying to achieve right now? Kind of rerouting yourself in targeting, let's say, reduction of substance abuse by 15% by, whatever, 2026, 2027, for example. If one way didn't work, we're going to try this way now. And so those are lessons learned. And sustainability of the project, Kayla kind of covered. You have to think about financial sustainability. A lot of times they want to see the financial sustainability and diversification of how you're going to continue providing those services, but you also have a plan of once the grant funds or grant funds have been used, you might have that infrastructure in place. Maybe you will charge a nominal fee or membership, or if you had a manager who was working on this project, a full-time manager, now you have to go on a part-time because you already put that infrastructure in place, and all you need to do is maintain that programming. So you can be very creative here, and maybe you could collect some of additional funds through private donations or individual donations, or so you have to be very creative here, but also important not to say, oh, we're going to apply again this same funding. So they want to see that you have a plan, but they don't mind that you apply for next round of the funds of the grant. So, but not good to write it on the paper in the application. Next slide, please. Okay, and then the budget and narrative. So within that 15-page, you might have the budget included, depending again if budget is in that 15 pages narrative or not. Typically it is, but then again, it's very important to have your budget reflecting to what you talked about in your narrative. If you're going to target substance abuse program through, let's say, trainings, and you're going to drive around for making connections with the local organization. It's not really my field to bring good examples, but usually I do a lot of agricultural work. So for me would be going to visit the farms, or you want to see that reflected in the budget. If your budget is completely off from your narrative, that's a red flag. So you have to really follow what you had in your technical merit, in your action plan of what you're going to do, who is going to do. Kind of go back and see what financial things you might need. If you're going to do workshops, then you would need to have workshop materials. Or if you're going to hire a staff, is this a new staff? Will they need a laptop? Will they need office space? So it all can be included in the funds. And then in the budget, a lot of times you have to actually narrate your budget, why you're requesting this fund. You kind of provide a small description of this is a training intended for throughout the 3 years. We will target, let's say, 150 people with substance abuse, and these are the supplies and materials will be needed for that. So important to provide the narrative for the key big numbers that you're requesting. If you're having a sub-award, then you would, if you're going to sub-award a local partner, then you would need to remind or describe again why you're sub-awarding this partner. Maybe the partner will be doing additional work that the capacity that you don't have, and again, you can't have everything. Partnerships are very good, so you would show the breadth of your impact, and then that way you're sub-awarding local partners to do the work they are committed to do. And data management. If it's a research project and you're going to do some research on human subjects, it's very important to provide. This is something very new, might not be seen in private foundations. It's mostly federal right now. They look at how you're going to collect that research data, how you're going to keep that. Is it going to be in the filing cabinet with the access with a key? One person will be managing all that. If you're doing paper surveys, or there is online surveys, who has access to that? So you do need to kind of think, if it's a federal funding, how you come up with that data management. Again, this is not as big as part of scoring criteria, but a lot of times it gets picked on by readers, by the readers. Next slide, please. Again, as additional documentation, when we talked, this could not be part of that 15-page narrative. The key proposal that usually is reviewed, you look at list of key supporting stakeholders. If there is an again organization that you're going to sub-award, that organization would need to provide a supporting documentation, what they're going to do with the funds that you are going to give them in, to complete parts of the project, and commitment. So if you have 3, if you have 1, it's very important to have those key supporting stakeholder letters of support in, so that it brings all the pieces together for the reader. In-kind or cash matching funds commitment letter, again, depending on if there is a cash matching funds request, it can be in form of in-kind, which might be, I think Kayla covered a little bit, equipment that you might have in the office matched against, let's say if it's a 25% match out of 500,000, then you could match here equipment, office space, and then staff time. It's, if you have volunteers, if you have director who is already working on that, on some of the programs, can they match their time with that 25? Or cash, again, if you have cash, it can, depending on what the requirements are, can be a cash match as a request. Matches cannot be federal with federal. It can be federal, state, private, but they cannot be matched with federal. I don't remember state with state, but that's something that I could double check. But federal and federal cannot be matched for sure. Feasibility study and or business plan, if you have that, if it's a requirement, you would have to probably provide that through a third party who has conducted that. And most recent, and then Patrick will cover the last 2 points in this slide. Thank you.
So we went through the common grant application process. That's the step 1, was the fill in the blank part, and that's information about your organization. And the second part is the narrative. And then the third part of that common grant application template is your attachments. And sometimes they request attachments, sometimes they don't. If they don't ask for it, then you don't provide it. If they do ask for it, then you should provide it. A lot of grant application process, a lot of the grant application process is following the directions and filling in the information that they're requesting, and not providing more information than they do request. If you think about when we talked about the Jeffries Foundation, it's a family foundation. There might be a family sitting around the table and looking at the different grant applications. If one is very long and doesn't have and has more information than was requested, it might get pushed to the bottom of the pile because it takes more time to review it. On the other hand, if you don't provide everything that they're asking for, then that becomes a problem as well. And one of the things they may ask for is the recent audit financial statements. Sometimes they may ask for those financial statements to be written to be audited by an accountant, and other times they may not. You have to look at the application form and see what they're looking for. And the tax exempt determination letter is if they are looking to provide grants to a public charity, they may ask you to include your letter from the IRS describing you as a nonprofit organization. And it's a shortcut for some foundations and some government grants as well to determine if you're a charitable organization. If the IRS has already determined that you are as a 501c3, then they don't have to think about that part of it. So sometimes they want to have that tax exempt determination letter. That doesn't mean that you can't apply for a grant if you're not a 501c3. It just depends that you have to do that research and find out what it is that they're looking for, and understanding the type of organizations that they do provide grants to. So we're going to look at what goes into preparing a winning grant proposal. Kayla is going to mention some of those components.
I sure am. And I'm going to go really quickly because a lot of this we have already covered earlier on in the workshop. So this is review as you're referencing back to these slides. If you're actually preparing your grant proposal, this is a helpful slide to look at just to make sure you've checked all the boxes, right? And I will call out just a couple of pieces on here. I'm not going to read it word for word. I think one of the most important tips on this slide is to, after each sentence in your grant application narrative, ask, so what? This can be a really great way to make sure that you're getting the most bang, if you will, not for your buck, but for your written word. That those funders are looking at your application and they're going to know it's really compelling because it's clearly and boldly written in plain language, and you are telling them with each sentence why they should pick you, why they should fund your application. We've talked already about aligning goals with the grant, following directions, using the terms and keywords given on the grant application can be a great way to, again, escalate your application to the top of the pile. It's the same when you're filling out a resume or applying for a job. Oftentimes you're going to look at the words right from the job description and put it into your cover letter or into your resume. So the same goes here with grant applications. And then the other most important tip on this slide is really to learn from rejection. So not every grant application will be funded. And that's just a fact of the way that our systems work, the number of funds available. You should learn from that rejection, figure out how to have a winning grant proposal next time, and maintain that relationship with the funder. So be able to ask the funder, hey, what were some of the reasons why I wasn't selected for this grant, or why our proposal wasn't selected? Next slide, please, Patrick. All right, so we are wrapping up here, and we are going to do one more activity just to make sure that everyone's still following along. So you'll see a poll that was just launched on your screen, and guess the 3 common grant writing mistakes. So this should not be a difficult quiz. Hopefully you'll find it to be pretty intuitive. Go ahead and we'll give it just a minute or so. All right, and then Patrick, if you could go to the next slide, we'll let the poll go for a little bit here before we end it, and I'll talk about what's on the next slide. All right, so it looks like oops, I think Patrick and I clicked the button at the same time. So the common grant writing errors that are made, the mistakes that are made, not following instructions, not asking for the money, and submitting your application too late. And I will take those in reverse order. So submitting your application too late. If it says on the application that that those grant proposals are due by midnight on April 9th, submitting it at 12:01, often not only is it sometimes not even available, because if it's an electronic submission that you're doing on their website, they may have that button to close at midnight. But if it's something that you're emailing or you're mailing in an application, oftentimes they are not even going to look at it. You've submitted it after the deadline, it's out. So don't waste all of your time and energy going through all of the steps that we just talked about and then submitting it after the deadline and not even having it get a look. Not asking for the money. So we talked about this earlier on, right? Being humble and being perhaps a little bit shy about what you're requesting is often not a good tip. You want to make sure that you're asking for the full amount of funds that you need for your project. And not following instructions. This is the biggest piece, I think. You're going to want to look at that grant application cover letter, the instructions that they're putting out for you, and make sure that you're following those step by step in order to have a successful application. Next slide, please. All right, so then we couldn't continue to have a grant writing workshop without talking about what comes after the grant. So let's say that you have submitted a really successful proposal. You just found out that you were funded. What do you do next? You want to keep that funder informed well beyond the grant requirements. So making sure that you're going back to that relationship building piece, and you are in relationship with your funder. You're allowing them to see kind of where things are at in terms of the requirements being met or not met. You are including them on any evaluations that you have put out, any outcome metrics tracking that you've done, making sure that that funder is hearing about it. Seeing photos of the work that you're doing is always really important to the funder, and just keeping that line of communication open. And the one of the other reasons why that's important to do is I'll reference back to at the very beginning of this workshop when we were sharing the grant writing experience that we've had and what we've been working on. Audrey shared the grant that she's working on, which, as I said, is a phase 2 grant. So that is a grant opportunity that is available to them because they were funded a first time. So continuing that funder relationship is super important to be able to be eligible for second level grant opportunities. Next slide, please. And this is Patrick. Take it away.
So this is an overview of grant proposals and grant writing. The important thing to remember is that you don't have to be a professional grant writer to apply for a grant. Anybody can apply for a grant. There's no qualifications that are needed for that. But we've given you some tips and some information on what professional grant writers do. Is they do some research ahead of time. They look into what their organization does, and they prepare that application so that it meets the mission of that particular funder, because you're carrying out their mission, and it provides the information that they're looking for, not excessive, not extra information, but the information that they need to make that decision on the grant. And know that a grant application and a grant proposal, proposal is an application. They're similar terms in this, is that's really a contract with you and that funder. So to have somebody else write it, or even to use AI to help you write that grant, know that whatever you have in that grant application or that grant proposal is what you are committing to accomplish. And so you want to be sure, even if you're not the one writing it, but you're the one involved with that particular project, to know what is the content of that grant, because that's what you are committing to. And grant funders talk with one another. That's why we shared with you the Wisconsin Philanthropic Network. There are networks of grant grant funders, and they do talk to one another. So you don't want to get on the wrong side of the list. You don't want to get on that naughty list. You want to be on the good list. And so you want to make sure that you're following through on the evaluation. So in the proposal, you're writing down how you're going to do the evaluation. At the end of the grant process, you provide that evaluation that you said you were going to provide. And in the grant application, you are describing the project that you're going to do. And at the end of the project, you want to see that you want to show them that the project has been accomplished. So we're giving you some general overview of the content of what you would have for a grant proposal, and then also how you can research those grants to find the ones that match what you're looking for. So with that, we're close to our time, so there isn't a lot of time for questions, but we can hang out around a little bit afterwards and answer those questions. We'll be providing an evaluation of our workshop here, and you can feel free to contact us. Ariga, Kayla, and myself, our contact information is on the screen. And the information will also be provided after this. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to somebody else.
Yes, thank you so much, Patrick. I wanted to let y'all know that everyone see, I'm hoping everyone can see my screen now. So the feedback survey, you can either use your QR code, just take a picture of this really quick, or you can click on the link provided for you. It was the first link in the series of long links for Great Lakes that I posted. Your feedback is very, very important to us. We sincerely hope that you enjoyed today's virtual R event. The recording slides and appropriate resources from our presenter will be made available within approximately 7 days. You'll receive an email with links to all the content through Great Lakes ROTA-RC's website. Once the content is available to share, we'll send out certificates of attendance to all our participants using the information you registered for today's virtual session. If you do not receive a certificate within 14 days of today's event, please feel free to reach out to the Technical Center's email address. Again, we encourage everyone to check out Great Lakes ROTA-RC's products. And I will put our contact information again in our slides. Please check out our upcoming events. We have an overview of opioid overdose and an impact on our communities on Thursday, May 30th. And we're redoing our Reimagining Recovery series. It was highly popular, very, very up to date on Thursdays, June 6th, 13th, and 20th. And I think that's all I have to share for you. So I'm going to stop the recording, and if y'all have any questions in the last minute, maybe they can provide questions in the last minute answer.